All right, we're about to dive into what's basically a scientific detective story. The mission? To find the exact spot in our brain where logical reasoning, that pure abstract thinking, actually happens. Now, this is a question people have been asking for thousands of years, and the answer, well, it's way more surprising than anyone thought.
So let's start with you. Think about the last time you were really trying to solve a tough puzzle, or maybe you were in a deep debate trying to follow a complex argument. You can almost feel the gears turning inside your head, right? But what does that really mean? What parts of your brain are actually lighting up to connect all those dots? That's the core mystery we're going to unravel today.
And this is not a new question. We can go way, way back to 350 BC, and Aristotle was already thinking about this stuff. He pointed out that even though we all speak different languages, the mental acts themselves, the raw logic behind it all, seems to be universal. He basically kicked off this huge debate that's still going on. Is our ability to think just a side effect of language, or is it something more fundamental? So that brings us right to the central question for the scientists in our story. Is our ability to reason just a clever trick that other parts of the brain are performing? Or does it have its own special, dedicated home somewhere in our neural wiring?
Okay, so this really boils down to two competing ideas. On the one hand, you've got the theory that reasoning is just a fancy feature of our language system. We think in words, so maybe that's all there is to it. Or maybe it's just our general problem-solving skills at work. But then there's the other, more radical idea. What if logic is its own thing, a unique, separate skill with its own dedicated hardware in the brain?
To figure this out, our scientific detectives first had to do what any good detective does. They had to round up the usual suspects. In this case, that means the two main brain systems that have always been the most likely candidates for where our reasoning skills live.
Okay, so suspect number one, the language system. This makes a ton of sense, right? These are the parts of our brain that handle speech and reading and writing. Since we often talk through a problem in our heads, it seems totally plausible that the same system we use for structuring sentences also structures our logical thoughts. It's a very strong suspect.
And then we have suspect number two. This is what scientists call the multiple demand network, or the MD system for short. Now think of this as the brain's super flexible all-purpose toolkit. It's the part of your brain that kicks into high gear whenever you have to focus on any difficult task, not just one specific thing. So the thinking goes, maybe logic is just one of the many tough jobs that this do-everything system handles.
So you've got your two main suspects, the language system and the MD system. How do you find out which one is the real culprit? Well, you've got to design an experiment to catch them in the act.
And the method they came up with was really elegant. It's pretty simple on the surface. First, you get a bunch of people, and you put them inside an fMRI scanner, which is this amazing machine that can watch brain activity in real time. Then, while they're in there, you give them a bunch of pure logic puzzles to solve. And then comes the crucial part. You analyze all that data and see what lit up. Was it the language system, the MD system, or was it something else entirely?
And when the scientists finally looked at those brain scans, they saw something that they were absolutely not expecting. It wasn't just suspect 1 or suspect 2 doing the work. A brand new player had just stepped onto the field.
And this is the moment where everything just clicks into place. The scans showed that, yeah, the language and MD systems were a little bit active, but they were not the stars of the show, not even close. Instead, this completely different network, you can see it highlighted right there, it lit up like a Christmas tree. And here's the crazy part. It only activated during the logic tasks. It was like a sleeper agent in the brain that just roared to life when it was time to think logically.
The researchers had finally found it. They had their culprit, and they gave it a very fitting name, the logic network. And as you can see here, it's defined as a specific set of brain regions that are selectively tuned just for abstract logical reasoning. And, this is key, it works independently from language or our general-purpose problem-solving toolkit. So this was a massive discovery. The case seems solved, but in science, you have to be 100% sure. It's one thing to find a new network, but it's another thing entirely to prove that it's truly independent, that it isn't just tangled up with other functions. So how could they be absolutely sure?
To get that final, definitive proof, the researchers turned to a remarkable and, frankly, jaw-dropping line of evidence. They started studying the minds of people whose brains were, well, highly unusual.
Okay, get ready, because this next piece of evidence is just astonishing. On the left, that is an MRI of a person's brain where a huge part of the left hemisphere is just gone.
It's been replaced by a harmless cyst. Now, you would look at that and assume this person must have severe cognitive issues. But then, you look at the chart on the right. That blue dot? That's this exact person's IQ score. It isn't just normal, it's significantly above average. And this wasn't just a one-off case. They looked at a whole group of people with these large cysts, and their average IQ score was 118.4. Now, to put that in perspective, the average for everybody else is 100. So these individuals weren't just getting by. On average, they were smarter than most of the population. It's incredible. And here's the study's official conclusion, and it is just staggering. They found no evidence of impairment in any major cognitive domain. And we're not just talking about test scores. The source material mentioned that these people had highly demanding jobs. We're talking computer scientists, neuroscientists, archaeologists. Just amazing. And that right there, that's the clincher. That's the final, definitive piece of evidence. Think about it. If logical reasoning were just a part of the language system or some other general system, damage this massive should have caused huge problems. The fact that it doesn't is the ultimate proof that the logic system is its own separate thing, resilient, independent, and incredibly robust. So we've found a dedicated logic circuit, and we've confirmed that it's independent in the most dramatic way possible. So let's just take a second to really think about what this discovery means for how we understand this amazing thing called the human mind. So let's just recap the big takeaways here. First, this really supports the idea that the brain isn't just one big computer, but more like a toolkit filled with specialized modules. Second, we can finally help settle that ancient debate. Human reasoning is not just a fancy extension of language. Third, we now know there's a dedicated logic circuit that is a core piece of our mental hardware. And finally, and maybe most inspiringly, this shows that our minds are way more resilient and adaptable than we ever gave them credit for. Which really just brings us to one last fascinating thought. For centuries, we just assumed logic was all tangled up with other things like language. Now we know it has its own secret network that was hiding in plain sight this whole time. So it really makes you wonder, if something as fundamental as logic could have its own undiscovered system, what other incredible secrets is the brain still waiting to reveal to us?